Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. We're going to get started. Tonight we're learning Maseches Sukkah, Daf Lamed Vav, and as well Daf Lamed Zayin, Amud Aleph, wrapping up to the top of Lamed Zayin, Amud Beis. Not quite to the Mishnah, just the top few lines, and then we will stop there. We're in the midst of discussions on the halachos of an esrog, and we learned the Mishnah yesterday on the bottom of Lamed Dalet Amud Beis that spoke about a variety of halachos that we're going to dig into a little bit deeper. Here's one of them, natla pitmaso. So he said, Tana Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar natla buchanto. This is talking about, that the mortar and the pestle, so the tool that actually is rounded at the end that's used to crush inside the bowl. That's what a pitom looks like. Which one is that, the mortar or the pestle? I always forget. I don't know. Anyways, that's what he's just saying. It's the same halacha, nothing changes, just to highlight the fact that it is that shape. 3 lines from the bottom, niklaf, if it were to be peeled, amar Rava, hai esroga to iglid ke'ahina sumka. If there's an esrog that's peeled and it leaves over a reddish looking scab, apparently this is how it would heal. If you scratch a lulav and you peel a little bit, it'll come back with a little bit of a red color. So the halacha is kshera, that it would be kosher. I asks the Gemara, niklaf pasel. How can you say that if there's going to be niklaf, that it's going to be kosher? After all, it should not be. It should be pasel. So says the Gemara. Sorry. Apologize for those of you on Zoom.
You should really start reading.
You should really come on time, and then I won't have to think about it. Okay, so sorry, my computer just turned off. So then the Gemara says we have a stira about a Gemara that is peeled a little bit, and the Gemara answers last 2 words on the page, lokashia. This is not a problem. Ha bekula, ha b'miktsasa. In one case, it's bekula when all of it was peeled and then it grew back red, and the other case is b'miktsasa. But which one's which? Which one's kosher? Which one's not? This is a big machlokes in the Rishonim. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi dibar maskal bekula, that if the whole lulav, the whole esrog, was peeled and then came back with a reddish color, so then kosher. But the second Rashi says, and the second Rashi says b'miktsasa, that would be a problem. If there's like it's spotty, it's pasal dimenumarhu, it's spotted, and that's not hadar. But take a look at Tosfos, which is 2/3 of the way down, last of the short lines in the Tosfos, Dibur Maskal Habakula Habamiktsasa Pirish Bekuntras. Rashi said B'miktsasa Pasal Demichse Kimenumar, but Rabbeinu Chananel Pirish Ipcha, he said the exact opposite. Bekula Pasal Dilitrefos Medamila B'Shmaitin, as we'll see, that if it's all peeled, then it has a similarity to the world of Trefos. So we saw two different shitas about esrogim that are peeled, and we said that there's a difference between that which is partially peeled and completely peeled, and Rashi and the Rabbeinu Chananel have a machlokas as to which one is which. According to Rashi, we're concerned about menumar, and therefore, if it's fully peeled and all the same color of red, no problem. And according to the Rabbeinu Chananel, no, the one that is like that is similar to a treifa, and therefore that's a problem. The Gemara on the top of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph continues nistak and nikev. It's actually not the language of our Mishnah. It's separated nistak and nikev. And the Gemara says that if there was a crack in an esrog, if there was a hole, now we're going to be focusing only on the latter, which is if there was a hole. Tani Ula Bar Chanina. Ula Bar Chanina taught us the following. Nikev nekev mefulash b'mashu. If someone took a needle and put it all the way through from one side of the esrog to the other, under those circumstances, it would be pasal, even b'mashu, even with any hole, even if no flesh is missing. Right? If you take a needle, a 2-inch long needle, and you push it through 1.5 inches long, and you pull it out, and there's just the juice, it doesn't matter if there's juice or not, that is going to be and that's going to be pasal. And if it is not mefulash, if the needle doesn't go all the way through, but does cause for a depression in the esrog, then biki isar. Then if the depression's size is that of an isar, that of a coin, it would then be pasal as well. So let's say, for example, you're holding your esrog, you take a hammer and you hit the esrog. No flesh is missing, but now there's the circle shape of the end of the hammer right inside the esrog. So if that is the size of an isar, so that's also problematic. Okay, and then the Gemara is going to widen this discussion into a discussion of the comparison between the world of trefos, halachos that we don't know usually in detail, but we know about in general. And that's why when we go to the store and we buy food, one of the things that we have saved a lot of time on is checking for trefos. And if you ever go to a slaughterhouse of chickens, you'll see them checking for chicken issues. And if you ever go to the slaughterhouse of meat, you'll see them checking for meat issues. There are 18 general trefos that we are, more than that, but 18 that we're concerned about in general. This is for another time. But the Gemara does make a comparison between the world of esrogim, the psulim of esrogim, and the psulim of treifa. So says the Gemara, third line of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. Boy Rava, noldu be'esrog simane treifa mahu. What if an esrog were to have developed some of the simanim that, had it been an animal, would be considered a treifa? What would be the din? So says the Gemara, "My kamiboyle." What case are you asking about? E niklaf. If you're trying to compare what happens to an animal when they're skinned to an esrog that's skinned, tanina. We already discussed that. E nistak. If you're trying to compare that the windpipe of the animal, which is a treifa, to have the windpipe be split. If you're trying to compare that to an esrog, we spoke about that too, tanina. And in nikev, and if you poked a hole in it, we also spoke about that if it goes all the way through, then it's going to be b'mashu, it's going to be problematic no matter what. And if you're hitting it with a hammer, that type of impact on the, we learned about all these things already. So what then is your comparison? We've already spoken about a number of treifa types and treifa profiles to try and carry it back over to the world of esrog. So what's your question? So answers the Gemara. The real question is like this. What we're talking about is the following. Reya, when there is a lung, if you have a lung, the outside of the lung looks normal, but the inside of the lung has gotten mushy. It's gotten liquidy. Of course, we know scientifically that like tissue doesn't just turn into liquid. We know that, but there are scenarios where the integrity of the lung may be depleted to the point that when you turn it over, it could be that blood will come out, or like tissues of the lung, no, tissues of the lungs, not tissues. So that's what the Gemara says is our question. What would happen if we had a lung like that? So then if it pours kikiton kshera, because the outside of the lung is in good shape, and as long as the outside of the lung is in good shape, so then it's not considered a treifa. So too, we should argue the same. Maybe we should say the same by an esrog. Now let's continue about the lung just for another moment. V'amar Rava, v'hu dekaima simfonha, halo kaima simfonha treifa. What word are you hearing here? Symphony. And what is this referring to? The bronchioles inside your lungs. It's a fascinating idea. Who knows if the word symphony came from the Daf Gemara, Daf Lamed Vav? I don't know what the etymology is or what world it comes from. Is it Latin? I don't know, but it's very old. And we were talking about the insides of the lungs with the word symphona. So this is what the Gemara says. Yeah, it's true that this lung is able to pour out liquid, and its integrity, its internal integrity is questionable. However, it does still have the major branches of the breathing tubes, of the bronchioles inside. So then if it didn't have that, if it was totally liquefied on the inside, that would be a problem. So hachamai, what if we had an esrog that looked like that, where the outside of the esrog was intact, but the integrity of the inside of the esrog was questionable? Hachamai, would we make an equivalence between the world of treifa, where the lung has an external integrity and a couple of bronchioles in the middle and the rest is mush? Would we say the same halacha applies in both cases, that just like by that lung, it's nishbach kikiton, it's going to be kshera? Maybe we should say the same by an esrog, hachamai. So says the Gemara 12 lines down or so on Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, Dilma, you can't make this comparison. Dilma, maybe hasam by the lung. The reason why we say that the lung is kosher, even if it pours out a liquid kikiton like a canteen, hasam hu delo shalid ba'avira, hadar bari, because the lung is not exposed to the outside air, it's included within a closed body, so then maybe it has the chance of healing. Aval hacha, but with an esrog, the shalit ba'avira, sruche mitzrachas, maybe we'll say that it'll just get more ruined. Oh, dilma loshna, or maybe there's no difference at all. So we have to try and answer this question, and I'll just re-ask the question on the outside. What is the level of comparison between the treifa world and the esrog world? If we have a treifa in the world of animals that can be transferred over to esrog, how far do we go in this comparison? And the Gemara answers about a third of the way down. Tashma, let's try from a brisa. A brisa, separately and important that we're seeing it here, says as follows: esrog tafuach saruach. It doesn't say tafuach vis saruach. It seems to be that there's one entity going on, but tafuach literally means swollen, and saruach means gross. It just got ruined. Kavush. If an esrog, sometimes you'll see this in like decorative homes, that they'll have like a lemon looking thing sitting in liquid, like on your shelf in the kitchen, that you never ever touch, but the liquid makes sure that the that the lemons don't ever degrade. What if that was your esrog? Sitting in a liquid kavush, it's sitting in liquid. Shaluk, it was overboiled. Kushi, it was of a very dark color esrog. Lavan, or it was a white esrog. Umenumar, or it was spotted. In all of those cases, pasal. The brisa continues, esrog kakadur pasal. If you have an esrog that's in the shape of a sphere instead of the elongated shape that we are used to, pasal. The yeshomrim af hatiyom, even if it's like a twin esrog, it has like kind of two parts to it merged together. So let's say you have that. And then the brisa continues still more. Esrog haboser, if you have an unripe esrog, that's a machlokes in the Tanoim. Rabbi Akiva posel v'chachamim machshirim. The brisa continues still more. Gadlo bidfus. Let's say that you have a mold and you want your esrog to be in the shape of a dog, whatever you want. So you take the mold, you put it as a frame around a budding esrog, and as it grows, because it's going to grow to a certain volume, whatever it will grow within that shape. So what if I want it to be a special shape? I want it to be the shape of my last name, a letter K or the letter Kuf. So then does that work? So no, Gadlo bidfus, if it grew inside of a frame, inside of a shape, something to create the shape, so kimin beria acheres, and it looks like something else, halacha is that it's pasal. End of brisa. Now, what is our question? Remember what we're trying to figure out. Can we compare a lung that has external integrity but barely any internal integrity to an esrog that has external integrity but barely any internal integrity? Says the Gemara. What did we learn in this brisa? Tani mihas, we learned tafuach saruach. We learned about something that's swollen and ruined. My love, isn't it the case that we're talking about an esrog tafuach mi bachutz v'saruch mi bifnim? We're talking about an esrog that's bloated on the outside and it's destroyed on the inside, and therefore, yes, we have a full comparison from the world of trephos to the world of esrog, and we have our answer. Yes, we do transfer, and therefore the esrog would be pasal. Therefore the esrog would be kosher, same exact halacha, just like we had over there. Says Gemara, lo. No. When this brisa said tafuach saruach, idi v'idi mi bachutz, both of these phrases are identifiers of external problems with the esrog, below kasha, and there's no stira between our case and this case. Ha de tafach afal gab de lo sarach. We could have a case where it's bloated but not disgusting, and we could have a case of how the sarach afal gab de lo tafach, and we could have a case where it looks gross even though there is no swelling. So therefore, no, you can't really make a comparison between the two, and we would probably assume in this case, though the Gemara doesn't say this explicitly, we would probably have to assume that an esrog of this nature, where the external integrity is good and the internal integrity is poor, we would probably have to assume from this Gemara that it is not kosher. Amar Mar, let's analyze the brisa that we just learned. This brisa, the last 8 lines that we just learned, we're going to go through this almost the whole brisa. Amar Mar, we said that an esrog kushi is pasal. An Ethiopian esrog, and as mentioned, they very much look like avocados. If you've seen the picture books, the Masifta has like very detailed pictures about this. And I thought it was a picture of an avocado without having read the context. And then we're talking about an esrog kushi. They're very, very dark. So it says the Gemara, how can you say esrog kushi is pasal? V'hatanya, kushi pasal, a dark esrog is kushi kasher, a dark esrog is kasher, but dome kushi is pasal. Only something that isn't actually an Ethiopian one, but something that looks like an Ethiopian one, that's the one that's pasal. But a kosher, that itself should be kosher. So we have a stira. What did we say in the brisa 8 lines ago? There we said that esrog kushi is pasal. And then the next brisa wrote esrog kushi is kosher, and that's a stira. So Amar Abaye, kitnan nami masnisin dome kushi tnan. Yes, it did say that it was talking about kushi, but it meant dome kushi, and that's why it's pasal. But had you in fact imported an Ethiopian esrog, not one that looks like one, but one that is one, then under those circumstances, we very much would have assumed that it would have been the same exact halacha, and that's why it's pasal, because it's dome kushi. Rava gave another answer. Rava said, even if there's a pure stira between kushi kosher and kushi pasal, some people say that an Ethiopian esrog is going to be kosher and others say pasal. Rava gives a very, very practical answer. Rava Amar lokasha halan v'halahu. It depends where you live. We live in Bavel, says Rava. Rava lived in Bavel. We live in Bavel. Ethiopia, that's where we get a lot of esrogim from. Half the esrogim in town are made that way. By us, that's still begeder pre-eitz hadar. It's still beautiful. But halahu, for the people who live over there in Eretz Yisrael, you've never seen such an esrog, and by you, it's not hadar. This is a fascinating idea, because doesn't that show you that hadar is about the cultural decision of what is going to be considered to be hadar? So let's say in the city of Chicago, Ledugma, in the city of Chicago, everyone decided that hadar is the green esrog and not the yellow. And let's say that in Los Angeles, that everyone decided the reverse. So from this Gemara with Rabba's answer, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you should therefore not do the other thing. So there is a degree of cultural application here without stepping outside of the bounds of halacha. We're still talking about pre-eitz hadar, all the rules still have to apply. But it would be a more expansive type of explanation that the Gemara is giving. Let's continue analyzing the brisa that we saw in the middle of this page. Esrog haboser, we said in regards to an unripe esrog that there was a machlokes in the Tanaim. Rabbi Akiva posel v'chachamim machshirin. Amar Rabba, Rabbi Akiva wasn't the only one who said posel. Rabbi Akiva v'Rab Shimon amru davar echad. They both held that an esrog boser, an haboser, an esrog that's unripe, they both held that it's going to be posel. Rabbi Akiva hade amron. Rabbi Akiva, that's the Mari Makom that we have, right above us in the middle of this page, because he said that an esrog haboser Rabbi Akiva posel. What's the Mari Makom for Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon says the Gemara, Maihi, what's his Mari Makom? To indicate that something that is unripe is going to be not considered to be that fruit. The Tanya, 6-7 lines from the bottom of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. The Brisa writes, Reb Shimon Poter Asa Esrogim Bekotnan. He was talking about a different area of halacha. This is a Mishnah in Maseches Maisros. He's talking about Maiser. If you have a very small esrog, so the halacha is that if it's very small, it's poter from Maiser. It has to be large enough, whatever the parameters are, it has to be large enough to be shaykh by Maiser. So maybe we should therefore assume that Rabbi Akiva and Reb Shimon hold the same thing. Rabbi Akiva, in our case of esrog, he says that an esrog haboser, an unripe esrog, is not eligible to be an esrog. And Reb Shimon says that a small esrog is not eligible to be for Maiser. Seems very similar. Seems similar. The Gemara says, don't even bother talking about this. You're completely wrong. Amar le Abaye dil malohi. But maybe your comparison is wrong for two different possible reasons. One could be from Rabbi Akiva's perspective, and one could be from Rabbi Shimon's perspective. Ad kan, maybe we would say, Lo ka'amar Rabbi Akiva hacha deba'inan hadar veleka. Maybe the only reason why over here, when it comes to the actual halachos of an esrog, that it's esrog haboser, it's unripe, and it lacks the din of pre-eitz hadar. It's not beautiful. It's a it's a baby. It's a newbie. It's still in like developmental phases. That's not hadar. But Aval Hasan by Meiser, maybe Kerabanan Sfirale, maybe he would argue with Reb Shimon and say the Taka, you're still chayav in Meiser. In other words, maybe the reason why he's machmer Rabbi Akiva by Esrog HaBoser is because of the uniqueness of the din of Sukkah. But in general, we do assume that an unripe fruit is still halachically a fruit. And in the reverse, Inami, 4 lines from the bottom, maybe we should say that for another reason, there's no reason to compare the sheet of Rabbi Akiva and that of Reb Shimon. Ad kan lo ka'ama Rabbi Shimon Hassam. Maybe the only reason why Rabbi Shimon held what he held in regards to Meiser, in other words, that an esrog bekotnan, that a small esrog is not shaykh to the world of Meiser, is ela dichsi, because the pasuk says aser ta'aser es kol tivu azarecha kederach shebnei adam motziin lizriya. When does someone take something out to plant? That's only when it's large enough. But here by Sukkah, maybe he wouldn't have held like the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Maybe he would have held like the dissenting opinion, and therefore, says the Gemara, as we turn to the top of Lamed Vav Amud Beis, Besu lo midi. Don't even bother talking about this anymore. Conversation has ended. Rashi says out what Besulo midi means even a little bit more. In the first Dibur Hamaskal, Besulo midi, Ein ladun achar davar zeh. The lo sava Rabbi Shimon ki Rabbi Akiva, lo Rabbi Akiva sava ki Rabbi Shimon. Done. Don't make the comparison. This conversation's over. So a sharp line, and therefore we can't make any real conclusions about the worlds of small fruit as it relates to the mitzvah of esrog and small fruits as it relates to meiser. We don't know. Says the Gemara, where are we? Oh, top line, Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Gadla b'tfus v'asokim in beri acheres pasol. This is what we saw in the brisa, that if you put a frame, a particular shape around an esrog that has yet to grow. By the way, I saw this in one of these commercials about how terrible we are to the oceans. You know, the plastic 6-packs that hold 6 cans together. So there was a turtle that grew up stuck in one of these things. The front half of his body is normal size. The back half of his body is normal. And the inside is literally the width of what one can would have been. He got stuck. Now, that's awful. But I'm talking about with fruits, similar idea. They're still going to grow to their normal size, but they may be restricted in certain ways. So I want it to be a circle, a square, a triangle. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So Ben says Rava, a comment that seems to not need to be said. Amar Rava, lo shanu elakim beri acheres aval kibriyaso kosher. Let's say that you put it in a mold that's the normal shape of an esrog. Let's say you wanted to have the most perfectly shaped esrog. Perfect. So you buy the most perfectly shaped esrog mold. You go to the esrog tree and you clip it on the branch from above, and it's perfect. It comes out beautiful. So it says the Gemara, kosher. Rava says it's kosher. Says the Gemara, pshita. Yeah, because what did it say? It said kimin beri acheres tanya. The Brisa said only if it looks like a beri acheres. Of course, if it looks like a normal esrog, it's going to be fine. So says the Gemara, as one might have anticipated, we're not talking about exactly Mr. Perfect. What we're talking about is lotzricha da'avida dape dape. You made it with ridges on it to have a certain design in it. Yes, the overarching shape is approximately the same. It's elongated. It tapers back to the pitum. The okitz is a little wider. It looks normal, but it has like a design. You know, it's like you could put your name in it. You know, like you can do whatever you want. So if it looks that's a little sacrilegious, but if the shape is otherwise normal, so that was why Rava came along to share this idea. Itmar, we have a statement from the Amoraim. Etrog, if you have an esrog, shenakvuhu achbarim. Let's say that you have an esrog that had some little bite marks in it from a mouse. Amar Rav says, Ein ze hadar. This invalidates it because it's no longer pre-Eitz hadar. It's gross now, right? When I lived in Washington Heights, this was like every day. And then you'd throw out packages of food because you saw one little nibble and you knew where it came from. And then we moved out of town. So then says the Gemara, Eini, hold on one second. How can it be that there's no din of hadar here and therefore it invalidates it? After all, Rabbi Chanina, matbil ba v'nafikba. Rabbi Chanina would dip his esrog into something and then take a bite out of it. And seemingly he still was able to make a bracha on it. So how does all of that work out? It's also super bitter, and the shell is the klipa is very thick. Okay, says the Gemara. Wait a second. Before we speak about Rab, well, the Reb Chanina kasha mas nisan. We said in our Mishnah that even if you stick a needle through, it's going to be problematic. So how can this be okay? So says the Gemara, between the two shitas of Rab saying that with mice taking bites out of an esrog that is not hadar, and Rabbi Chanina taking a bite out of the esrog, Bishlama mas nisan le Reb Chanina. I could answer, says the Gemara, the seemingly strange case of Rabbi Chanina taking a bite out of an esrog. How can you answer that? Lo kasha. Kan be Yom Tov Rishon, kan be Yom Tov Sheni. Because on Yom Tov Rishon, when you have a higher level of the mitzvah on Yom Tov Rishon, that day you have to make sure that it's perfect spitz, it's exactly like it should be. But on day two, if you take a bite out of it, it's not the end of the world. Elo the Rav kasha, but Rav Shita is even more difficult. According to Rav, says the Gemara, if our concern is about hadar, so then how do you explain the sheet of Reb Chanina? If you're going to say that by Reb Chanina, I understand he's not concerned about hadar. It doesn't bother him. He doesn't need hadar on the second day. But if your whole concern about mice is hadar, how do you explain Rabbi Chanina? So it says the Gemara, Amar Lach, Rav would say, no, shani achbarim demeisi. It's different. Mice are gross. I could explain the difference between Rabbi Chanina and the mice. That's gross. And therefore, that is how he approaches it. But the Gemara here, 8-9 lines down, presents a second version of this dialogue, which is divergent from what we just saw. Ika de Amre, there are those who say, Amar Rav, zehadar. Even if a mouse does take a bite out of it, it would still be hadar. Deha Rabbi Chanina, and he brings Rabbi Chanina as a raya. Deha Rabbi Chanina mat bilba v'nafikba. So in this version, Rav is a makel across the boards. He is okay with Rabbi Chanina, and he's also okay with the mouse, and he doesn't say that it's a lack of hadar. And then in this version, the Gemara says, with the Rabbi Chanina kashem as nisan, what does he do with our Mishnah, which indicates that even if there's a minor chisaron, that it would be a psul. So says the Gemara, lo kasha, kan be Yom Tov Rishon, kan be Yom Tov Sheni. The same answer we gave before, that according to Rabbi Chanina, he distinguishes between day one, din d'oraisa, and the remaining days of Yom Tov. At the 2 dots, a quarter, almost a third of the way down. Esro katan. So says the Gemara, Amar Rafram bar Papa, ki machlokes kan, kach machlokes be'avanim mikorzalos. We learned about avanim mikorzalos in Maseches Shabbos. We learned about Mikorzelis, and this was basically the way that people would clean themselves after going to the bathroom. So they would take these particular types of stones that were able to clean their body in a meaningful way. What about on Shabbos? So Tanya, the Brisa writes, B'Shabbos, Gimel Avanim Mikorzelos muter lahachnis lebeis hakisei. One was allowed to carry 3 of these particular stones into a beis hakisei. Take a look at Rashi for some context. Rashi is about an inch below where we are, halfway down on the page. Dibur hamaschel muter lahachnis lebeis hakisei. And Rashi says, Besoch dalet amos, you're allowed to carry these 3 avanim mikorzelos, these 3 rocks to clean oneself. You're allowed to carry them dalet amos, ubeis hakisei besadeh, in a field where the bathroom is in the field, the eino mukaf mechitzos, even with no walls around you. The ein kanel tiltol derabanan. All that's happening here is, if not for the context, carrying would have been an isser derabanan within dalet amos. We don't allow for the carrying within dalet amos. Umishum kavod abrios lo gazer. But because a person should kavod abrios, a person should be able to clean themselves after going to the bathroom. Wow. That's not what this says. There are shitas like that, but this is
the stones are within the dalet amos.
Oh yeah.
So that's the Rabbana also.
Carrying dalet amos when there's no mechitza, nothing at all. You're not allowed to do that. You meaning it's an isser derabanan. It's tiltal. No. The tiltal is on the rocks. We're saying that the rocks would have otherwise been muksa. We were matir the rocks, and you can carry them within dalet amos. The dalet amos is not the issue per se, but it's the rocks that otherwise would have been muksa. But they said mishum kavod abrios lo gazer, that there was no gzeira in this particular case. The kama shiuran. What size does this brisa indicate that would be allowed to be carried? The rocks, how large can they be, or how small can they be? Rav Meir Omer Ke'egos, Rav Yehuda Omer Kebetza, which is the same shiurim we were dealing with, and that's why the Gemara made this equation. And they said the shiurim that we're talking about by Esrog, same shiurim, the minimal shiur, the same shiur is what's discussed by the Avanim Mikorzelos, by the stones that were used for one to clean oneself. Almost halfway down, Uva Gadol Kadesh Yochaz. With what about the largest size? So Tanya Amar Rabbi Yossi, Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva Shabal Beis HaKnesses Ve'esrogo Al Ksefo. Could you imagine Rabbi Akiva walking into the Beis Medrash with an esrog that was so large he had to carry it on his shoulder? You know that point when you buy something and you can't even carry it regular anymore, and then you have to heave it up on your shoulder? I'm just imagining the scene of this Sar HaTorah carrying mamish, like a huge, bigger than like a massive, unbelievable. So says the Gemara, well, there's 2 shitas. Says the Gemara, Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda misham raya, af heim amar lo ein ze hadar. This is not hadar. What are you going to do? Hadar lulav too? How are you going to arrange that? That's unreasonable. So they said that doesn't qualify for hadar. Next Mishnah, halfway down on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Ein ogden es halulav ela b'mino. Tivei Rabbi Yehuda. When one does eged, when one ties together the hadasim, aravos, and the lulav, they should do something that is of the meaning of those 3 items. Reb Meir Omer afilu b'chut b'meshicha. Any type of rope will do, even if it's a new type of min. Amar Reb Meir, Ma'aseh b'anshe Yerushalayim shahu ogden es lulaven b'gimonios shel zahav. The people of Yerushalayim, they used to wrap this type of gold type of wrapping around their lulav and esrog. That's beautiful. That's stunning. It's a nice idea. They held it was mutter. Amrulo, and they said, yeah, it might be mutter, but b'mino hayu ogdeno somila mata. But that was just mamish decorative. But the actual eged that was holding things together, that was made out of something b'mino. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says here. That's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara opens. Amar Rava says, afilu b'siv, afilu be'ikra de dikla. You're correct that lulav is actually what we use from the palm tree. However, you are allowed to do the eged even with the vines and the other types of wood that grow around the dekel tree. You might have thought havamina that it has to be a lulav branch mamish. No, it could be anything from the palm tree is going to be fine. Totally reasonable to be used as an eged. Why does Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah say that it has to be the same min? Because kasavar, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that lulav tzarich eged. We have a formal requirement to do eged, and if that's the case, we need to make sure that that material is not one that conflicts with what we're doing. It would not be appropriate to do so, because if you brought as the string, as the thread to hold on to the eged. So then havamina that we could have done anything. You're not allowed to do anything. It has to be of the same min, because otherwise, since eged is a requirement, so therefore, if you add another material, it would have been problematic. The Amar Rava says, how do we know that other parts of the palm tree are viable for the eged? Maybe at the end of the day, maybe the lulav is distinct from the other parts of the palm tree. Why are you saying that that's the same min? Saying that how do we define min? Is min from the same tree? There's dozens of parts of trees. There's the bark, and there's the vines at the bottom, and there's the leaves, and there's the dates. There's so many options. So meichatesi that the lulav is the same material as the vines. So the Gemara is going to give a bit of a lengthy response to this question, which will end about 10 lines down on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. But let's keep focus here. The Gemara is answering the following question. How do we know that the vines that wrap around the base of a palm tree can be used as an eged? Is that similar enough to a lulav? The Gemara says as follows. The Tanya, the Brisa writes 8 lines from the bottom on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. Basukos teishvu. One should sit in sukkos, or we should sit in sukkos. Sukkah shel kol davar divrei Reb Meir. You can use anything you want for schach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, you cannot use anything you want for schach. And by the way, when Reb Meir says anything you want, it's the general rules of something that's not makabel tuma and something that used to grow on the ground. But Rabbi Yehuda has a very, very, very unique shita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein sukkah noheges ela b'daled minim shebelulav. Could you imagine what the lulav sales would be like? I got to get into that business. We got to start marketing Rabbi Yehuda's shita and then just buy stock in lulavim. Because if all you were allowed to do for your schach is that which is from the daled minim themselves, so you're going to have hadassim, ad ein sof, aravos, lulavim. You can't go buy bamboo. Bamboo is not one of the daled minim. So it says the Gemara, that's a sheet of Reb Meir. V'hadin no saying. And the Gemara says, and I can give you a beautiful logic that indicates that the sukkah should only be with the daled minim. And here's the Gemara's svara. Uma lulav, just like by the mitzvah of lulav, she'ein noheg balelos kibayamim, that it only has a mitzvah during the day. It's a mitzvah saseh she'azman grama, and by there, the mitzvah that's more limited in time, the mitzvah of lulav, eino noheg ela be'arba'as minin. There we're only allowed to use daled minin. So then sukkah shenoheges balelos kibayamim, then sukkah, which is more expansive of a mitzvah, it's a 24-hour a day mitzvah for 7 days. Eino din shelo tehel ba'arba minin. It's a fascinating svara. The first few times I read it, and still now I'm like, okay, but shouldn't you be more expansive and not less? This is the Gemara svara. Don't worry, the Gemara rejects this anyways. The Gemara says, Amrulo, hold on one second. Kol din sha'ata dan. Anytime you make a kal v'chomer, tchilaso lahachmir v'sofo lahakel, and by making your kal v'chomer, it will lead to a leniency. Eino din. Then it doesn't check off the boxes of a good kal v'chomer. What's the flaw with this? So the flaw, says the Gemara on the top of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, is very simple. What if lo motza arba'as minin? Let's say there's a year where there's 0 aravos, 0 hadassim, and 0 lulavim. But Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that you're only allowed to use the daled minin for schach. Sukkah matahela, says the Gemara, yehei yoshevu batel, but your kal v'chomer can't be right. It just can't be right. You've made it so that the two are so inextricably bound that you therefore can't even sit in a sukkah. But again, what if there's a drought? So then there's no mitzvah of sukkah. You killed both mitzvos. Those two mitzvos are not 2 peas in a pod. They're very separate mitzvos. The Torah Amra, after all, the Torah says as a separate pasuk in Chumash, Basukos Teshvu Shivas Yamim Sukkah Shel Kol Davar, and that's why Rav Meir doesn't like this. And Rav Meir says it can't be that way. It can't be that way. That it's only the daled minin. So he argues against it. Similarly, we see in Sefer Ezra that we see that other materials were used for sukkahs. Omer, the pasuk says, we see that they had alei zayis, olives. Okay, they had olive wood. Okay, and then susu kos kakasu. That's the end of the pasuk. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda. Well, what are you going to do with the pasuk in Ezra? Because we see from the pasuk in Ezra that it can't just be the daled minin. That's what you were promoting. That doesn't work. Rabbi Yehuda sever hani defanos. Those other non-daled minim items, those were used for walls. That's what Ezra meant when he said that we're using olive wood. No, that's for the walls. That's not for the schach. But when it comes to alei hadas or alei tamar, alei eitzavos, that's the schach. That's what he says. V'tanan, and then the Mishnah writes in the name of Rabbi Yehuda on this same discussion, Mesachachin b'nisarin divrei Rabbi Yehuda. You're allowed to use boards of wood, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. Boards of wood from a palm tree. Is that a lulav? No, that's wood from a palm tree. Says the Gemara, Alma, what do we see from here? That just like from a palm tree, we see that Rabbi Yehuda allows using cut wood from a palm tree, even though it doesn't look like a lulav. Alma, what do we see from here? Siva bi'ikra de diklamina de lulva hushmamina. So it's a long-winded answer, and we'd have to go through that. We had to go through the sugya of trying to figure out what counts as schach. We know the general rules of being makabel tuma and having grown from the ground. Rabbi Yehuda tries to throw in that we are only going to be able to use as schach that which is daled minim. And one of the things that he allows is wood from a palm tree. Wood is not a lulav, but it's from a palm tree and kosher for schach. So therefore we see that it's also true about the vines that surround the base of the lulav tree. Rabbi Yehuda arbas minini in imidi acharina lo. Is he really of the opinion that when it comes to the arba minin, that you're only allowed to use the 4 minin for schach and you're not allowed to use anything else? Tanya, we have a brisa. Sichacha b'nesarim shel erez. If you use a board, what's erez? That's a cedar tree. Well, cedar is not one of the daled minim. Let's see what he has to say about this. So if it's sheyesh ba daled tfachim divrei kol psula, if the board is 4 tfachim wide, everyone agrees that's a psul. That's for sure. Ein bahen daled tfachim. If there's less than daled tfachim, let's see who the lenient shita is. Reb Meir posel, Rabbi Yehuda machshir kashya. So the Gemara says that doesn't work. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion, seemingly, that's how the brisa presented him, was of the opinion that you can only use the daled minin for schach. This shows us black on white in a brisa that when it comes to erez, that we're talking about a non-daled minim tree and it counts for schach in the name of the same Tana of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's finish the brisa before we get to the answer. Umode Rab Meir would even agree that it would be mutter to use this cedar wood. Shem yesh bein neser leneser kimelo neser shemaniach psal benenu kshera. That if it was playing schach, then Rab Meir would agree. But just 1 or 2 pieces alone, that would not count. All right, so that's our kasha, which is a stira and Reb Meir, stira and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda wanted to say only daled minin count, yet we see that he uses erez over here. My erez, says the Gemara. What's erez? Yeah, I know we normally translate it as cedar, but there is one context in Tanakh where erez does not mean cedar. Says the Gemara, and erez is hadas. It's from the hadas tree. What is this talking about? Kid Rabba bar Rav Huna. The Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna. Amre be Rav. Rav said, Asara mine arazin hein. There are 10 types of erez trees. Shene'emar etain b'midbar erez shita v'hadas. The hadas is a type of, at least categorically, I don't know what it means from like a phylum and kingdom and a species type of conversation, that I don't know. But the hadas was a type of an erez tree, a type of a cedar tree, and it has that name as part of its overarching name, and therefore it's not a stira in Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda remains l'shitaso, because even when it says that he was willing to take a board made of erez, that erez he was referring to was a reference to the pasuk that was quoted by Rav, and therefore not a stira. Halfway down, Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, almost done, just a few more minutes, and then we'll stop. Reb Meir Omer afilu b'meshicha. Reb Meir says you're allowed to use any kind of rope to do the eged. Tanya, the Brisa writes, Amar Reb Meir, Maisa b'Yakirei Yerushalayim. The wealthy chashiva people in Yerushalayim, what did they do? Shahayu Ogden, Es Lulavein Begimonios Shel Zahav. They would wrap their lulav in some type of gold string or a gold bracelet. Amrulo, they said to him, Misham Raya, Bimino Hayu Ogden Osomi Lamata. But first they tied it down, Bimino. And this was only external and decorative, but it wasn't actually the eged, and therefore it doesn't pose a problem. Amar Lahu Rabba Lahanhu Magadle Hoshana de Beresh Galusa. Rabbah said to the people who were actually putting together the lulavim and esrogim for the Beresh Galusa, for the Chashav Rabbanim who were staying by the Reish Galusa. Ki gadlisu Hoshana de Beresh Galusa. When you're making their hoshanas, shaire ba beis yad, you should leave a place where their hand is free to grab onto the lulav, ki hechi delote havim chatzitza, so that there isn't going to be a chatzitza between their hand and the lulav. This is rooted in the opinion that they hold that eged is lav shmei eged, that there's no mitzvah, that ein tzarech eged. If you don't need eged, but you do eged, so then that strings a chatzitza. So they were saying that if you do eged, we paskin that you should not do eged. That's what he's saying here. The Rava says you should not do eged. So therefore, you need to make sure to leave a base yad, leave a place where the rabbanim chashuvim can hold onto the lulav, so that they don't have to worry about chatzitza. Chatzitza. Rava Amar. Sorry, that wasn't Rava. That was Rabba, excuse me. And this is Rava responding. Rava Amar kolena also eno chotzetz. Fascinating idea. If it's there to be made beautiful, so then it's not a chatzitza. Even if you hold that ein tzarech eged, it would not be a problem of chatzitza. Amar Rabba says, lo linkot inish hoshana bisudra. One should not pick up a hoshana. They should not pick up the aravos, the hadassim, the lulav with a handkerchief. Because we need to grab all of them in our hands. It's a chatzitza veleka, and if you're holding it with a handkerchief, you don't have that. The Rava Amar lakicha al yedei davar acher shma lakicha. It's not a problem. Even if you pick it up with a handkerchief, it's not considered a chatzitza. Amar Rava says, I'm the one who just told you this lenient shita. How do I know that that's the case? So says the Gemara, that's none. The Mishnah writes, Ezov, if you have if you're going to be using the mechatas, you're using the para aduma water to be matar someone. So you're using the hyssop. Ezov katzar became very short. Misapko bechut bekush. You can take a rope and stick something into it, and then the tovel, and then dip it into the water because it's hard to hold in your hand when it's so small. Umalet, and pull it out of the water. Ve'oches, and hold what's in your hand, whatever's left in your hand. Ve'ezov umazeh. So says the Gemara, why is that allowed? Why is that? I'm not even touching the azov. I've got something like a hook from a fish hook in there, and I lowered it into the water. Why am I? It says that we should do the lakicha and we should do the tefillah, seemingly be a daim without any hefsek. So says the Gemara, it must therefore be, says Rava, that the reason why I allow for interruption is because obviously that must work. And then the Gemara pushes back on this argument and says that's not a good mari makom mimai. That's different. When it comes to the azov, you stuck something into it, and it was as if it was all connected. But here you're holding it with a handkerchief. The handkerchief's not connected to the lulav. Ella says the Gemara mehacha, and with this we'll close. Mehacha, we know from the following mari makom that you are allowed to have something a lakicha al yedei davar acher. Nafal mishvoferes, if the ashes fall from the tube in which they are in, lishokes, into the water to create the mechatas, that's puzzle, that doesn't work. That's if it falls in. Hahi pilu, if you made it fall in, then that's when it's kasher. Says the Gemara, you made it fall in. Amai, why does that work? You weren't necessarily touching it. Says the Gemara, it must therefore be that counts as an actual holding of the lulav and esrog. Therefore, and seemingly in conclusion, if a person, let's say, had some type of like sensory issue and they couldn't touch the lulav and esrog or an allergy, so maybe they could wear gloves. It's not a regular din of chatzitza. Somebody sent me an email as a moel about 5 years ago. How dare you? How could you do a bris? Because I wrote on my website that I wear gloves. Sorry. I wrote on my website that I wear gloves. How could you? How could you call yourself a moel? There's mamash a din chatzitza by bris milah. I've never seen one. I called Rabbi first just to check my bases. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay, thank you very much. So here it seems to be that it would be mutter as well. All right, we'll stop right here. We'll pick up on Shabbos an hour before Mincha. And if there's enough, we can daven. I didn't daven yet. And Rabbi Robinson will be here after Mariv for some chizuk for Erev Rosh Hashanah. Wishing you all a beautiful night.